New hair, who dis? Hello and welcome to another video. My name is Heather and as always I'm reading with a vengeance and I hope you are as well. If you're new to my channel, very warm welcome to you. If you've been here before, thank you so much for coming back. How is everybody's reading doing? As you can see, I've settled into my new spot. I think this is going to be a good spot for recording, so here we are. Today I am going to be doing a book tag, as you can tell from the thumbnail. I'm going to be doing the Think Twice book tag. This is an original tag created by AJ Dunn Reads and Writes and with Jolene over at Bookworm Adventure Girl. They had each, I think, been doing book pairings, book pairing videos recently, and they decided to pair together to create this tag. And I think it's a really fun one, and I was super excited to do it because it gave me an opportunity to talk about books that I haven't talked about yet. I was tagged by the lovely Kristin over at Enter the Book. I will link all of their channels down below so you can check them out. They all have really great channels and I enjoy them very much. So this tag centers around doubles or pairs or anything that kind of shows up twice in books. And I think the prompts are kind of fun. So let's get started. So the first prompt is Double Vision. What is a book that features twins? And the one that I came up with is Cutting for Stone by Abraham Verghese. This book took me by surprise. I can't remember why I picked it up. I think it was like an Oprah Book Club book, but I'm so glad I did. I ended up loving it. I believe this was a 5-star read for me. If it wasn't, it was definitely a 4-star read. This story follows Marion and Shiva, who were born conjoined twins. They were ultimately separated, but they were born in Ethiopia to a nun who had kind of an illicit affair with a doctor. The mother dies at childbirth, and the father flees. He can't deal with the scandal, and much less being a single father to twins that he wasn't really planning for anyways. So these twins are raised by the doctors that work in this, I believe it is a convent if memory serves. So these twins grow up, they're close, but then they both fall in love with the same girl and their relationship is severed because of it. And one of the twins, I think Marion, leaves the country and he goes to America to continue his studies as they both end up being doctors themselves. And Marion is a successful surgeon in the United States and Shiva stays behind and he doesn't get any formal training, but he ends up working in that convent as a doctor, helping the villagers there. And then something happens that brings the brothers back together. And it's just this beautiful story about love and betrayal and brotherhood and forgiveness. And it's just gorgeous. I will say the first 50 pages was a little bit slow going. I think it was just 50 pages. But once you get past those 50 pages, it's just this beautiful sweeping saga about these brothers. The next prompt is Double Talk. What is a book with two or twice in the title? So I kind of cheated on this one. So I picked The Two Dead Girls for this prompt. This is actually kind of a chapter in The Green Mile by Stephen King. Now, I don't know if you know this, but when The Green Mile came out, Stephen King released it as a serialized book as kind of an homage to how they used to release books way back in the olden days. They would like release one or several chapters at a time, maybe weekly or monthly, and you would have to wait, kind of like the way TV shows do now or soap operas do now. So when it first came out, I first saw the very first installment, I can't remember what the first one was called, like in a supermarket. And I saw Stephen King's name, and of course I had to have it. And that's how I read The Green Mile. I read it kind of as it came out serialized, bit by bit. If you don't know, The Green Mile follows Paul, who is a supervising officer on death row at, I believe, Cold Mountain Penitentiary. The Green Mile refers to the walk along death row. This takes place in the 1930s, And John Coffey is a young black man who's been convicted of killing 2 young girls, and he is sent to death row. And he comes to death row and he appears to have inexplicable powers of healing. You meet all the other officers and you meet the other inmates, and it is a wonderful story. It's not a horror story. This is another book by Stephen King where, if you have not read Stephen King, if you don't like horror but are curious, this is a really good one. It is not horror. There's just a little bit of magical realism, and it's just about treating people humanely regardless of their histories. The next prompt is Seeing Double. What is a book with a reflection, shadow, or mirror image on the cover? For this one, I picked Good Girl, Bad Girl by Michael Robotham. I read this, I believe, last year. I listened to it and I was taken by surprise. I think this is one of those audiobooks that just sounded interesting that I came across as I was scrolling, and it was so good. It's the first in the Cyrus Haven series. I didn't realize that at the time, but I will be reading the rest of the series. I think there's only 3 in the series so far. So Cyrus Haven is a forensic psychologist, and he is called in to see if this young girl who goes by the name of Evie is ready to be released from a secure children's home. Evie has been living in this secure children's home for about 6 years, ever since she was discovered as a very young girl hiding kind of in a secret place after a terrible crime has happened that she has witnessed. She will only talk to Cyrus, and she has this innate ability to tell whenever anybody is lying. So Cyrus kind of takes her on and kind of takes responsibility for her in order to observe her and determine if she is ready to be released as an adult. Meanwhile, Cyrus is called to investigate a crime that's happened. I believe a figure skater has been found murdered, and he is called in to help with that investigation. And since Evie is around, she kind of puts her 2 cents in and tries to help, much to Cyrus's chagrin. But it's just a really good murder mystery, and Evie is a really, really interesting character, and so is Cyrus, and I really, really enjoyed it. I have the second one on my TBR, I just haven't gotten to it yet, but it's a really fun book. The next prompt is Take 2. What are 2 book covers that look similar but are by different authors? So for this one, I picked The Vanishing Half and Red at the Bone. So I've read Vanishing Half and I enjoyed it, but I haven't read Red at the Bone. It's on my TBR. I had a really hard time. I really wanted to talk about books that I have read so that I can recommend them or give you my viewpoints on them, but I couldn't find 2 books that I have read that are similar by different authors. So I really loved The Vanishing Half. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this book. It was very, very much a Booktube darling. But this follows 2 twin sisters who are Black and grew up in a small Black community. They end up running away together as 16-year-olds. They ultimately end up separating. One of the sisters ends up raising her daughter in the same community that they grew up in. The other one moves away and passes as white. So kind of follows their journeys as they each grow. One is a Black woman, one passing as white. Fascinating, fascinating story. I really enjoy it, and I would highly recommend that book. So Red at the Bone is by Jacqueline Woodson. This one came out in 2019. I hadn't heard a whole lot about it, but I added it to my TBR when I found it. So since I haven't read it, I'll just read you a quick blurb. As the book opens in 2001, it is the evening of 16-year-old Melody's coming-of-age ceremony in her grandparents' Brooklyn brownstone. Watched lovingly by her relatives and friends making her entrance to the music of Prince, she wears a special custom-made dress, but the event is not without poignancy. 16 years earlier, that very dress was measured and sewn for a different wearer, Melody's mother, for her own ceremony, a celebration that ultimately never took place. Unfurling the history of Melody's parents and grandparents to show how they all arrived at this moment, Woodson considers not just their ambitions and successes, but also the costs, the tolls they paid for striving to overcome expectations and escape the pull of history. So I think that sounds really, really great. It's marketed as historical fiction, literary fiction, contemporary. So that's right up my alley. And I think both of these covers are just beautiful, and whoever designed them I think is genius, because I feel like these color palettes and patterns are just begging to be picked up. The next prompt is I second that, and this is a book that is a retelling. Now, I came up with my list of answers for these prompts before I actually watched AJ's video, and it turns out that he picked the same book that I'm about to pick and tell you about, and the book I picked was The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I absolutely love this book. I read it last year. This was also a Booktube darling. I read it last year, and I think it was like in my top 10, if not 5, favorite books of 2021. I sobbed at the end of this book. But anyways, if you don't know, this is the retelling of Achilles and his relationship with Patroclus, and of course the whole Trojan War. And it's just told a little bit differently. And it's a beautiful love story, and I absolutely love it and highly recommend it. The next prompt is two can play at that game. What is a character who plays 2 roles or has an alter ego? For this one, I picked Joe Goldberg from You by Carol and Kepnes. I listened to You, and if you haven't read this book, or even if you've already read this book and you loved it and you're considering rereading it, I highly recommend listening to it because it is narrated by Joe Goldberg, and it is so creepy to hear his voice. You're basically inside his head, and it's so creepy, but in such a good way. So basically this follows Joe Goldberg. He is a bookseller, which of course added bonus to book lovers. He works in a bookstore. He's charming, he's smart, he is a likable guy, and oh yeah, he's a serial killer. What makes, I think, this so engaging is he ends up obsessing about women, usually one at a time. He will find a woman that he just immediately becomes attracted to and becomes obsessed with and learns everything about her. And he kind of puts her up on this pedestal and has her in this light of perfection, and then worms his way into her life, starts dating her, and then discovers, obviously, that they have flaws. And these flaws are absolutely unacceptable by Joe. And he ends up murdering the women. He meets, I think her name Gwendolyn, but she goes by her name Beck. And she comes into the bookstore and he finds out her information, and he starts to stalk her and learn all these things about her. And he ends up kind of like hacking her phone and being able to read her text messages, her emails, her social media posts, and all this, and how she engages with her friends, who are all just superficial people who are all about, you know, selfies and being seen wearing the right clothes and eating the right food and going to the right clubs and that kind of thing. And he mocks them, and you can't help with the observations that he makes about these insipid people. You can't help but side with Joe and and rooting him on in his endeavors. It makes you question your character, but it is such a fun read. If you haven't read this, I highly recommend it, especially the audiobook. The next prompt is It Takes Two. What is a duology? And of course, I cannot not talk about my favorite duology. I don't read a whole lot of duologies, but I found this one. I've talked about it ad nauseum on this channel, and that is the Wolf by Wolf and Blood for Blood duology by Ryan Groudin. So Blood for Blood really didn't hold up to Wolf by Wolf as much as I wanted it to, but I'm still glad I read it. Wolf by Wolf it's probably one that you can read by itself and not, I mean, you don't necessarily have to. It doesn't hang on a cliffhanger or anything. Well, actually it kind of does. Never mind, scratch that. But anyways, Wolf by Wolf is just one of those books that is multi-genre. It's historical fiction, but it's alternate historical fiction. It takes place around kind of the World War II era, but in a world where Hitler has won World War II. And so the world is a much different place. It has a little bit of sci-fi in it. It has a little bit of romance. It has a lot of adventure. I've talked so much about this book, so I'm hesitant to go too deeply into it. I just absolutely love it. It's probably going to be on my favorites of the year. There's no probably about it, but this was a no-brainer for this prompt. The next prompt is on the double. What is a book told in 2 timelines? Okay, so the book I picked for this is Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. And I picked this one for a couple of reasons. Number one, when it comes to Celeste Ng, everybody talks about Little Fires Everywhere. To be fair, I haven't read that. I watched the series and I enjoyed it. But Everything I Never Told You, I absolutely love this book. And I feel like people talk way too much about Little Fires Everywhere and not enough about Everything I Never Told You. So this book it follows the Lee family. It opens in 1977 and Lydia, the younger daughter, and I believe she's a teenager, I can't remember exactly how old, but she doesn't come down to breakfast, and it turns out she goes missing for a couple of days, and this isn't a spoiler because you find out right away. Her body is found. This book tells you the story of what it does when a favorite child, a seemingly favorite child, dies, and how it affects the sibling, how it affects the parents individually. And then you also go back in time and you learn about Madeline, the mother, and how she got to this point in this family. Madeline is a white woman from the United States, and her husband, Lydia's father, James, is a first-generation Chinese immigrant. So it's a mixed-race family, and that has effects on this family, of course. It just really kind of talks about how children are the products of their parents' upbringing as well. And I can't really, of course, go too much into detail without giving certain spoilers, but it's absolutely a beautiful family saga, everything that leads up to this young girl's death. And I'm not sure if I'll read Little Fires Everywhere since I watched the show and I feel like it's already been spoiled for me, but I will definitely be reading her latest release, Our Missing Hearts, because I just love the way she writes. The next prompt is a perfect pair. The last 2 books you gave 5 stars to. This is so easy because it's been recent. The last 2 books that I gave 5 stars to were The Guardians by John Grisham, which of course is a legal thriller about a man who is a lawyer and also a pastor, and he works for an organization kind of like the Innocence Project. He goes and helps men or people who have been wrongfully convicted and tries to get them justice. Really, really great book. Gave it 5 stars. Could get through it fast enough. And the other one was a nonfiction book, and that was The Storyteller by David Grohl, who is the founder of the Foo Fighters. And so it has a lot to do with his rise in fame and as a musician and his time in different bands, of course, including Nirvana, and him just becoming a rock legend. And it was absolutely wonderful. I listened to both of them, so they were both really great audiobooks. And Storyteller was narrated by David Grohl, which of course makes it even that much better. He really knows how to tell a story. So of course his book is aptly named. So yeah, those were the most recent 5-star books that I read. The next prompt is 2 for the show. What is a book that has been adapted to film 2 or more times? Of course, it's really difficult not to talk about Stephen King here, but I wanted to have a variety, so I picked Papillon by Henri Charriere. Please forgive my horrible French. This is an actual true story. Henri Charriere is a man who was wrongly convicted of a crime and sent to a really harsh prison. It talks about his multiple escape attempts. The first adaptation came out in 1973, and it was with Steve McQueen playing Charriere and Dustin Hoffman, who plays Louis Degas, who is a quirky little man that Henri meets in prison. They become friends and they kind of help each other not only exist in prison, but also to try to escape. Excellent movie, highly recommend it. And then they just came out, I say just, it was 5 years ago. 2017 was another version, and this one was starring Charlie Hunnam, who is the delicious snack from Sons of Anarchy, and Rami Malek, who also was brilliant as Freddie Mercury in Bohemian Rhapsody. I found the 2017 one okay, but the story itself, the book, I found was way more engaging than I expected it to be. I flew through that book. It's so good. It seems almost fantastical, the things that he goes through and how he escapes. I want to say he had like 7 attempts at escaping this prison. And of course, I won't tell you how it ends. I won't spoil it for you. But if you're jonesing for an adventure novel, I would highly, highly recommend this book. The next prompt is Two's Company. What is a book with 2 or more authors or a translated fiction book? So I picked a translated fiction. I picked The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafon. This is translated from the Spanish. And I read it. I think it's been a few years since I read it. I enjoyed it. It was unusual. And I thought it was beautifully written. I didn't love it as much as I thought I would. I feel like this is one of those books that I read at the wrong time. I feel like if I reread it, I'd enjoy it more. But this follows Daniel, who is the son of an antique book dealer in Barcelona. And it takes place, I think it starts in the mid-1940s. And Daniel reads a book by an author by the name of Julian something. And he absolutely loves the book, and he loves it so much that he tries to find other works by this author. And as he's trying to find other works by this author, he's discovering that someone is systematically destroying the rest of this author's works. And so he starts to research that and investigate that, and he finds himself kind of falling down this rabbit hole and learning about these unsolved mysteries and murder and lost love. Just finds himself on this quest, this adventure quest. I don't know. As I'm sitting here describing it to you, I feel like I'd want to reread it. I don't usually reread books, but I feel like I'd get more enjoyment out of it if I reread it. Am I going to turn into a rereader? I feel like every video I make, I mention a book that I might want to reread. Have you read The Shadow of the Wind? What did you think of it? The last prompt on this tag is double take. Recommend 2 books you think would pair well together and tell us why. So I picked Where'd You Go, Bernadette by Maria Semple. This is a beautiful and funny and witty, lovely story about a relationship between a mother and a daughter. And then I also picked A Fraction of the Whole by Steve Toltz. This is a beautiful, sweeping story about the relationship between a father and a son. So I thought these 2 books would go well together. I gave them both, I think, a minimum of 4 stars for these books. I really, really enjoyed them. That's it. Those are the prompts for this tag. Thank you again, Kristin, for tagging me. Have you guys read any of these books? What did you think of them? I would love to hear your comments down in the doodly-doo. Were there any books that popped up in your mind when I listed these prompts? I would love to hear your recommendations as well. I will be tagging a few folks for this tag. No pressure whatsoever. I tag Sarah over at Sarah Hart's Books, Rachael at Rachel's Bookmark, Katie over at Katie Reads, and Dave over at Book Blather. These are all really, really wonderful channels that I enjoy watching. So go check them out if you're looking for a new channel to watch. I will link them all down below. If you're a booktuber and this looks like a good tag to do and you haven't been tagged yet, consider yourself tagged. If you're still watching this video, please consider giving that like button a boop, and a subscribe would be wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.